Hello! Today I'm going to be painting in this homemade watercolour sketch booklet that I put together a while ago. This is part 2. I painted flowers in my first booklet in part 1, and today's theme is going to be forest because I was also looking at the cover of this booklet. And I have a 5th piece of paper in this pocket here which I'm going to paint on as well, so I'm getting straight into it today. You may want to check out part 1 first because there is a spoiler at the end of this video where I show both finished books. So let's get into it! Oh my goodness, I was having a technical issue immediately in this video. Because my camera went out of focus and I didn't notice for quite a long time. That is just so annoying because once I've done one take, that's it. I can't do a second take. But here we go, it's back in focus at last. So my first painting is inspired from this picture that I found. It is most definitely an AI picture, which is why it looks pretty fake. But I just really like the colours in it more than anything. So I started off with painting a very light wash in the background, let it dry, and then I painted in some pale brown lines which are meant to be trees in the distance. And now I'm building up the foreground with more layers, adding in more intense washes of colour as I go. This was actually quite a challenging painting to do, and that's because watercolour is by nature very transparent, and so it's quite hard to put layers on top of each other and get an opaque look, which is what I was trying to do with some of these colours. But if you use opaque paints like gouache or acrylic, it's much easier to go over with a lot more detail in later layers, whereas watercolour it's a lot harder because it just gets darker and darker, and you just can't go lighter once you start adding on those layers. So that's usually why I add in white ink at the end of my paintings, just to get a bit of highlight back, because I'd lost it all here, as you can see. But I kept working on it and it eventually came together, and I'm happy with the final outcome. It just went through quite a long ugly stage. As I mentioned in my first video when I was doing paintings there, I had the same issue with these ones too. The trick is to not give up too soon, which is easier said than done sometimes. Now I'm adding in some much darker tree trunks in the foreground here, and that pushes all of the other ones back. This would be around where the painting started coming together and I was feeling a bit more confident. I'm using the same paints as last time from 3 different palettes. I have my Sennelier palette, Roman Schmal and Holbein. Although I think this first painting was almost exclusively Sennelier, except for that teal colour which came out of the Roman Schmal set. I'm painting in some rocks here with brown and green, and those actually turned out quite well, although I think I could have added maybe some more reflection underneath them. But nitpicking aside, I do like the colours in this particular painting. It's a very limited palette. There's a brown, I think 3 different greens I used, and a cobalt teal. The paper is Canson Moulin du Roy 100% cotton cold press, and it is such a joy to use. It actually works like a cotton watercolour paper should. You may have seen me working in my Handmade sketchbook, which is also meant to be 100% cotton paper, but it is not acting like this, that's for sure. This paper I can add on so many layers, use heaps of water and not get any nasty blooming. And I think if I can ever figure out how to make a large sketchbook with my own paper, that will be the way to go in the future. I'm just adding some little inky details, getting those highlights in, and this just really brought the whole painting together and gave it a bit more life. I'd like to paint this picture again, I think, with an opaque paint, either gouache or acrylic or something, just so I could get a lot more detail in it, but I think this white ink helped a lot. On to my next picture. And I'll show them all again at the end of the video. But I found another AI one, and it is of a deer in a forest. I also liked the colours in this, but my painting ended up looking not very much like the reference picture because I changed my mind on a few things. The main reason for this is I'd drawn the deer too large to begin with. You could see I'd blocked in where its body and legs should go, but I ended up drawing the head and antlers far too large for it, so I've just had to rub all of that out and make the body of the deer much bigger. And then of course the legs had to go off the page because they'd be out of proportion otherwise, so I decided he's standing in long grass instead. And my grass is pretty sketchy looking here. I did fix that up a bit later in the painting. Because I had drawn the head and antlers really well to begin with, I just didn't want to rub them out and have to start again. And I think the body and legs actually turned out okay as well, so the proportions of the deer are pretty good. And now I'm just painting in some different colours on its body, a brownish red and a yellow ochre. Those are Holbein paints, but I think the rest of it is just a mishmash of all 3 palettes once again. And I left some areas blank for its white markings. So I actually did all of the paintings in both books over a couple of days, and I was switching between booklets because I was painting on one, letting it dry, and then working in the other book, and it took me quite a long time to get all of my clips together because they were totally out of order. I'm using that cobalt teal from the Roman Schmoll set again. It's such a pretty colour. It's not quite right for a blue sky, but I just didn't really care because it was so nice. And you can see how the paint and water is dispersing beautifully on this paper. No nasty edges or blooms, it just sinks in and then you can paint over it again once it's dry. I decided the deer needed to be framed by some leaves, so I'm just painting in up blobby bits here, and then I'll go over with more detail once that background had fully dried. Using the same greens as I did in my first painting here. I've got a very light yellow green, a mid-tone green, and that dark forest green by Sennelier. It's so perfect for shadows. And then I fixed up the grass in the foreground a bit with some darker green, just to add in a bit more interest really, and make it tie together with the background. And it still felt a bit empty, so I'm just dotting on some different green paints, the same colours, just to make it look like there's pollen or midges in the air and make it feel a little more alive and moving. I was totally making it up, as you can see, because the reference picture is nothing like what I ended up with. Adding in a bit more detail on the deer to get some better values going on, and those antlers needed a bit more definition to them. So I really like how this painting came out. And I'm just finishing up by using some of my trusty white ink to add in some more little white dots, and I'd added definition to its tail. Not the picture I'd originally planned, but I actually think it turned out better, so I'm happy with that. And on to my third picture. This one is a rabbit in the forest. Yet another AI picture, but I just really like the colours in this one. I thought it was very eye-catching. Of course, by having these 2 pictures side by side, it's either a really tiny deer or a very giant rabbit. You can decide on that one. They're not in proportion with each other, that's for sure. In my previous booklet, I had been drawing with Supracolor watercolour pencils, but in this booklet I did use a graphite pencil for a couple of the pictures because it was just easier to rub them out if I made a mistake. And I knew that would probably happen with more complicated subjects like animals. Ah, that's so annoying, it's gone out of focus again. I don't know what's been up with my camera lately, but it has been glitching a bit more than normal, and I do apologise. It will come back into focus shortly, I hope. But basically, I was doing the same sort of thing where I'm painting in the background first, just adding in all of the colours, and then letting it fully dry while I worked on the other booklet, and then coming back to add in a far more detailed painting over the top of that wash. So usually I'll start with a wet on wet underpainting and then paint wet on dry for the most part because it's a lot easier to control where the paint goes. It really helps when the paper cooperates. And no matter the level you are with watercolours, whether it's a total beginner or more experienced, I really recommend investing in good quality paper. This just makes the painting process so much more fun. And easy too, when you're not having to fight with the paper. Now this particular paper I'm using, Canson Moulin du Roy, is actually really hard to get because they mostly discontinued it, and I think you can only get it from Jackson's Art in the UK. But there are some other brands which are just as good, so if you can get yourself some Arches, Fabriano Artistico, or Saunders Waterford paper, all 3 of these are perfectly great to use, and I know there are some cheaper brands out there which are quite good too. It depends where in the world you are as to what's the most readily available. So it's worth doing a bit of research, and a slightly cheaper way to try more than one kind of paper is to buy a large single sheet of the paper which you'll find on those huge paper racks in art shops. And then you can cut the paper down to whatever size you like and paint on it. You can even make a little booklet out of it like I've done here, and then you can find the paper that just suits you the best. Some paper companies actually have sample papers as well, so if you can get your hands on those, they're really great just to do little practice paintings and then you can just see how the paper works. That's a super cheap way of doing it. You can find them, I think, on Jackson's, and it's worth asking the companies themselves whether they have a sample pack, maybe on their website, or you can send them an email. I've tried sample packs from Saunders Waterford, which I'm pretty sure is owned by Canson, and also Fabriano have a pretty good sample pack of their different kinds of paper. So you can see with this bunny painting, I've been working these layers and just building up the colour so it's brighter and brighter. I think of all the paintings I've done in the 2 videos, this was my favourite. I just really like the colours in it. And I'm finishing it off with some white highlights, giving some more definition to its fur, and then adding in some whiskers in a moment. Here they go. I'm so happy with this painting, I really love the colours in it. And just to remind you, the ink I'm using is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's the best ink ever, I love it. I pulled the piece of paper out of the pocket and I still have one more to do in the booklet, but let's do this first. Surprise, surprise, it's another AI image, but I just thought this one was really cute, even though it looks very fake. But really, I'm just using it to get the reference of what a toadstool looks like, because if I try to draw this myself, it just never looks right. I did use watercolour pencils for this particular drawing, but I'm going in with a wet-on-wet wash for the background, and I'm going to leave it very blurry so it looks like everything has just faded off into the distance, giving it the hint of tree branches in the background. And now it's fully dry, I'm going in with some of the foreground because I didn't want that bit to blur into the background. And you could see where there's a little bit of a line on the mossiness of the tree, so I just went over that a few times and kind of covered it with darker paint in the end. There we go. No one's the wiser. Usually with a painting, I'll just kind of adapt to how it's behaving at any given time, because watercolour is by nature very unpredictable. I do just like to let it go where it wants to sometimes and not try to control it too much. How bright is this red? This one is French Vermilion by Sennelier, and the darker red I'm using is Permanent Alizarin Crimson by Holbein. So those two went together really well, I think, and I will come back with a lot more detail and adding in the white dots to it. These leaves are a bit of a mess, unfortunately, but I did kind of fix it up too, kind of. I mean, I think I might have been a little overly ambitious trying to do 10 paintings over 2 videos, so some paintings are definitely more successful than others. This one's not quite so good, but I had fun doing this, and that's the main thing. Creating something is always better than doing nothing, especially when you're worried that you're going to make a mess of it and all of that lark. It's just better to get painting, and if it's a mess, well, you can go on to another painting and hopefully learn from your mistakes. I try to learn from my mistakes, although there are certain things I will do time and time again. But hey, I'm human, I'm not perfect, and it's all part of learning and growing as an artist. It's not a linear or exponential growth, it's pretty much up and down, although it does get more up the longer you do it. Like anything, practice makes perfect, and this white ink saved the day on this painting, that's for sure. It looks so much better now it has white dots on it, and I was using it to add highlights and white lines around the edges, and these finer details just made the mushrooms or toadstools look a lot better. I added some to the background as well. I seem to be adding lots of little dots on my paintings lately. It just makes them feel more alive somehow. Maybe it's the movement of them. But we'll finish this one up with a bit of a blur, and now I'll go on to my last painting, drawing it with a graphite pencil once more, and this one's actually from a photograph that I took, not AI. It's a kookaburra, and I had really wanted to include at least one Australian animal which is found in the forest. Kookaburras are such an iconic bird in Australia, and the sound they make is just amazing when you hear it echoing through the trees. It took me a while to get the drawing right once again. Kookaburras have a very square head, and so it's quite a distinctive look. If you don't get it right, then it just doesn't look like a kookaburra. Mine's a little bit chubby at the moment, but I think once I started painting him, he looks a lot better. Firstly though, I decided to paint in the branch, and you'll see in this painting that I'm not really using the colour scheme that was in my original photo because it doesn't match with the other paintings in this book, so the background's going to be from my imagination. I really love how this tree branch looks with the merging of the dark paint in with the lighter yellow colour. It's a very pleasing gradient. And now it's time to paint the kookaburra. I'm always nervous starting a painting like this because what if I make a mistake and it doesn't turn out how I want it to? But those are nerves talking. I try to ignore that inner voice and just get that paint on before I can think too much. This actually turned out pretty well in the end. This was also my last painting, so I was very comfortable by now after painting all of the other pictures, and I was feeling way more relaxed doing this one. It went quite quickly, even though there was quite a lot of detail in the bird itself. It's funny because not too long ago I did a video showing all of my unfinished sketchbooks, and I don't know if that jinxed myself, but I've just not been in the mood to paint in them or do anything in my sketchbooks, not even simple drawings, so they had been very neglected. But I was looking at these two that I'd made and thought, maybe I could just fill these and I'll feel like I've accomplished something. So that's why I actually did these two videos. I just felt like I needed to break this block that I've been having, and this has helped so much. You can see I'm using that really bright cobalt teal once more because I decided the kookaburra needed to be on a lovely blue sky. It also kind of matches in with the deer painting I did, because now I'm adding in some gum tree leaves in the foreground just to break it up a bit and make the painting look a bit more interesting. Totally imagined, I wasn't working off any reference here, so they're just kind of made up leaves. But not everything has to look like a photograph. And now I'm finishing off this last painting, of course, with my white ink, because every single painting in these two books has had white ink featured in them, and I can't possibly break that trend now. So just finishing up here, and then I will show you the entire booklet once it is all finished. So here we go, opening that forest cover, and I've got my first painting on the right here. Like in the other book, I could have had a pocket on the left there, so I could have had a sixth painting, but I'll do that again in the future maybe. I love this page spread, it's my favourite of all of them. I just think these two paintings are really successful. I also like my kookaburra, I think he's really cute on the blue sky background. The toadstool painting is in its little pocket here, and once again extremely difficult to pull out. So next time I would make the pocket only go halfway up the page rather than the full height, and that will make pulling out this piece of paper so much easier, I'm sure of it. There we go, it's finally coming out, yay! It actually turned out better than I expected now I'm looking at it again. It does look like a toadstool, and that white ink just made it look so much better than it was when it didn't have that ink on. And it actually went back into the pocket quite easily. I'm surprised about that. But if you haven't seen the first video, you might want to click off now because I'm just going to show both books right at the end of this one. Otherwise, let's see them together in the world's most awkward book flipping session because I kept getting pages in the way of each other. But I feel like I've really accomplished something this week, and I'm super proud with myself for finishing these two books, even though I was struggling to paint anything when I first started out. I just think all of the paintings look pretty cool, and I'm happy with how both booklets have turned out. I'd love to hear in the comments which was your favourite painting from either video, and if you have any hints on how to improve these booklets and make them better, please give your suggestions so I can make improvements on future booklets that I make. But these two were pretty successful, all things considered, and having less pages means it's so much easier to fill them really quickly. Yay! I'd really appreciate a thumbs up on this video, and you might want to click the subscribe button for more. I've got part 1 up here if you're still here, and there's another video as well. I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Swatch you later, bye!